Bump stickity brisket.
Yo. That's right, it's Tuesday night. Another episode of The Void, broadcasting live from the Shop Studios, Jacksonville, Florida. For those of you, looks like we got 3 folks on with us tonight in this fellowship known as The Void. Of course, we have several things going on right now. Get into it. Alright, so letter to the editor. Not a little clever title, but we'll use that as a jump off and see what we have going on. Now, there is a air conditioner. I don't know if you guys can hear it in the background. If you can, let me know in the live chat because I'll go turn it off. I don't really need it on. I have to deal with you guys can hear it. But all right, so like I said, thank you for joining. Let me get this camera on. Anybody out there want to jump in and do some live editing just to help support the show? Hey, what's up? You don't have to pay any money to help support, though there is a Patreon link in the description if you want to hook it up. Actually, I probably shouldn't. Should have just left the title screen on. Hold on, let me turn off this air conditioner. Lost the remote. Look at that. You see, that's the joy of a live show. See, now normal high quality shows would have edited that stuff out, but you know, you get the raw. This is the raw reality of what's going on. All right, let's see what's going on here. Got 5 folks on with us tonight. 5 very unique folks and people in all of the billions of people that are out there, and Superfan Chris, so I have been told, has helped to gather a bunch of folks to join us in our quest. All right, so Monique is on. What's up, Monique? Superfan Monique is there, and Kate, thanks for joining. Welcome, and Superfan Chris, of course. What is up, sir? In fact, let's look at this. So Superfan Chris actually, it's a little secret here and people don't know this. Superfan Chris actually sent me a letter to the editor solicitation that was sent to him to sort of chip in and make, put an opinion out there about Martin Luther King Day. And so it's coming up next week. Martin Luther King Day. Let me see if I can find the actual email that was sent here. I'll show you guys. And for our future audio only listeners, I will read it out to you. But I'll also show the picture just in case, so that way you guys can read along with me.
And one of these days, it'll be a little cleaner than it is now because I'm trying to host the show and do all of this at the same time. So sometimes some things slip through the cracks, but just bear with me for a momento, and we will. And by the way, if you are digging that Sep Rock beats from my boy Seppi, the link is in the description. That one is on this beat tape side K and L, track 175. So his nomenclature for that album is a little bit different than some of his other albums where it's just numbers. This one's just numbers. All right, so here we go. So for those of you guys that are tuning in live, hold on. That are tuning in live, I'm displaying the solicitation from Florida Times Union and what they're looking for. So here we go. So Jacksonville, Florida Times Union, Jacksonville.com. With the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday coming up, let's make it relevant today. Okay? If he were alive, what would he be saying and doing? Especially what if visited Jacksonville? That's sort of funky there to come from the editor, but whatever, proofread. Okay, please say if you don't want to be quoted, comments, da, 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 da. So that was the that's the the gist of the whatever the request for opinions, and this is really small letters, but anyway, I'm going to read it to you anyway. All right, so here's what I said, and it's a little bit different than probably what people would have automatically come to as far as a conclusion or what they would, if they were going to try to put themselves in Martin Luther King's head, right? Which is essentially what the Times editors are asking us to do, right? So here we go. So Times Union, thank you for reviewing my response. I'm afraid that within the current political climate and quote unquote establishment propaganda, this most important question cannot be answered truthfully without triggering a vast swath of the population. I will do my best to answer openly and honestly, as I believe the associated dialogue is more relevant now than even in Dr. King's time. Dr. King's efforts at civil rights reform, as disruptive as they were, weren't nearly as disruptive as his public critiques of capitalism, including the Poor People's Campaign. Despite the documented, heinous FBI COINTELPRO actions to thwart Dr. King before his assassination in 1968, he continued to warn the nation. A couple clear examples include his speech to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in Atlanta, Georgia, August 16, 1967, and his speech to the SCLC board, March 30th, 1967. Is it mere coincidence that his assassination occurred so closely to this blatant public critique? Perhaps that's for another day. If Dr. King were to give a speech today, he would lament the extent at which the contradictions of capitalism were allowed to persist, that the nation did not heed his warnings, and now our labor force, the majority of the population, get to reap the benefits of stagnant wages in the face of increased labor productivity and continuing inflation. He would point out that ongoing issues in the city haven't been solved or even mitigated by the capitalists. He would illuminate the public as to how they tear down historic sites, leaving the rubble of failed projects, and when they're quote unquote successful, offer meager wages, exploiting the population to the maximal extent of the law and according to labor quote unquote supply. He would illustrate how they block efforts for the city to create public works unless they can be exploited for their benefit, attempting to privatize anything they possibly can to benefit a few. I believe if he were still with us, he would continue to shed light on this socioeconomic state of the city and the nation as a whole, pointing out the contradictions and failures of capitalism until deemed too disruptive, quote unquote. Thank you for asking the question and reading my humble opinion as a Jacksonville resident. In remembrance of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a true hero of the people. So that's what I had to say about what I thought Martin Luther King might talk about, which is basically picking up where he left off. And the history books are very muted, very quiet about his critiques about about capitalism, because that is a sore spot in our history, right? We have some of you guys might have heard of something called McCarthyism, right? In the McCarthy era, where if you were thought or accused even of being a socialist or communist, or you leaned in that direction, you might be disappeared, or you might stand trial for those beliefs or something like that. So, I mean, we still have trauma from the McCarthy era that then got a steroid injection during the Reagan era and the introduction of neoliberalism and the whole neoconservative movement. So we have a situation where people. I mean, you can even include people like Malcolm X openly discussing and talking about the socioeconomic fabric that is based on capitalism, right? And why is that so important? Why is capitalism even brought up when a lot of the points or the points of reference or remembrance of Dr. Martin Luther King have to do with civil rights specifically and race relations specifically, even though he said many times in various ways that basically that as integration and as as racism is sort of peeled away legally, you are basically still have a group of disenfranchised people who are now available. Well, always were available, but now are still available for exploitation. Because one thing we have to remember about capitalism, and we don't get it confused. Remember the McCarthyite propaganda, the neoliberal propaganda will tell you stuff like, great minds like Milton Friedman and those guys. Either purposely or I hate to think that he's too ignorant to see it but then I hate to think that he was a patsy for money, right? That he would basically sell out to push a message that's fake. But, instead of talking about the labor and capital relations, the fact that you have a captive labor market that if you're born without resources, that if you're eking a living and barely can keep a roof over your head, how do you save up money for specialized skill to get a better job? How do you accumulate capital to create a business? And let's talk about this too. What's the success rate of business? Right? You think about what's the success rate of business. Most of us have heard the idea or heard the number like 90% fail or some astronomical number fail. And then when someone says, well, if you don't like the labor market, you could just create your own enterprise or your own, gig. It's like, well, so you're telling me the solution for the masses, for the majority of our brothers and sisters, is to enter into something that's a 90% fail rate. That's super smart, right? Number one. Number two, how many people do you know that probably aren't very entrepreneurial? Like, you wouldn't trust them to run your business. And I mean, why would you assume they would run their business, right? Not everybody's cut out to run a business. And also, we have to think about supply and demand and something called the efficient markets theory. Efficient markets theory basically postulates that markets are efficient, meaning if there's a good deal, the good deal will be exploited, game theory, basic sort of, but it'll be exploited to the point of where it is no longer a good deal and it just becomes normalized or whatever, right? Depending on the situation. So the reason I bring that up is because I hear a lot of libertarians and capitalist sycophants, right? That's a word we've used before, sycophant, somebody who is basically a lapdog, someone who is in praise of, or like basically subservient, not really subservient in any kind of like hierarchical way, but like So I'll give you an example. So a sycophant of capital, or capitalist, a capitalist sycophant is someone who's not a true capitalist, right? What is a true capitalist? A true capitalist isn't like something where you feel it in your heart and I'm like, I'm a capitalist because I believe in capitalism. It's not like it is turned into that because people have created an ideology around it. But in reality, in the starkest textbook and definition, and sometimes, well, yes. So let's just stick with in the I guess the most clinical way possible, right? A capitalist is someone with capital who owns the means of production. Basically, let's say you're running a landscaping operation. If you're the owner of that landscaping operation, then you're the one with the capital. You bought the means to create the business, right? Now, some people say, well, they did that. So since they bought all that stuff and whatever, they should be able to rent the humans to operate the machinery. What's wrong with that? Well, my contention is the people that you're renting have no choice but to be rented by somebody out there until they can create their own business, right? And some people say, well, you could create your own business doing, you could just walk around with window cleaner and squirt it on people's cars, or you can go find, make trinkets and try to sell them. And it's like, okay, well, is that the world that we want to live in necessarily, where everyone's trying to sell these trinkets and wash your car window and just beg for money that way? Because they're all entrepreneurs. Those are all entrepreneurs trying to start I mean, like if you get off the cruise ship in Jamaica and you see all these little kids trying to sell you trinkets, guess what? Those are all little entrepreneurs. But that is the future that you're asking for when you say that we don't respect labor for what it does in an equal sense that we respect capital for, right? So anyway, let's get to some of these. We've got a live chat comment here. Superfan Chris says there are some who believe that MLK was duped into certain talking points by, in parentheses, by those behind the curtain, to better, quote unquote, overall good of the African American community. X tried to warn him. Yeah, I mean, so I think, I don't know. It's hard. I'm not a super deep scholar in the relationship between Malcolm and Dr. Martin Luther King. From my perception of it, Malcolm was more militant and more openly critical of the system and the way that white supremacy could exploit through capitalism the Black community, right? Because something you have to remember about capitalism is the capitalist will pay you inversely proportionate to your desperation. What does that mean? To be inversely proportionate, right? So if something is directly proportionate, as something gets bigger, this other thing will also stay in proportion and get bigger, right? So if you expand, like for instance, when you're trying to expand a picture on your phone, you're doing an edit or something, and you make it bigger, all the stuff changes with that proportion, right? If it's inversely proportionate, it would almost like be doing the opposite of what you wanted. So normally nowadays in the current convention, right, the way that you would make a picture, like zoom it in, right, is to like spread your fingers out or whatever, right? Or to zoom out of it, you would squeeze it. But like, let's say if it was opposites, the more you squeezed it in, the bigger it got, right? And vice versa. It's coming out and it's starting to go in. So now it's inversely proportionate to your finger move, right? So the more desperate you are, the less you get paid, right? So inverse proportion. And so if you have a disenfranchised group of people, then they are extremely desperate. So therefore you can exploit them even more than you can exploit someone else. Also, it goes back into the white supremacist narrative that was, I mean, it's been talked about, the Southern strategy. There's evidence of this even in the Civil War propaganda. How do you get poor white people, poor white men specifically, to fight for the rights for rich white men to basically create a system by which their labor has no worth, right? So how do you do that, right? You have to use propaganda. You have to do things that convince them with their egos and some kind of visceral response that it is better this way. So how do you do that, right? You make them fearful for their daughters and wives of a free black man or something like that, right? Or you come up with other kinds of psychological rationale behind it, even though economically it's starving and hurting the white population, right? But you can get them to do it. You can get them to work against their own interest by making them feel like at least they're better off than those guys, right? At least I'm better off than that black dude, right? So, hey, whatever, go ahead. Exploit me all you want. As long as I'm getting an extra dollar more than him, I don't care. Or if I get to use a certain facility that the other person doesn't get to use, then it's A-okay with me. You could treat me like total ass, and that's okay. As long as I'm a class above this other person. And that's basically how the structure was set up, right? And if you don't believe me, go look it up. I'm not going to cite a bunch of sources and whatever right here in the podcast, but go look it up, right? But anyway, that is why a lot of times when we talk about these issues we're having in society, even as deep as depression, suicide epidemic, all sorts of things like that, I always go back to the fabric of our society, which leans on the structures that have been built over the span of the creation of this country. And if we don't look honestly at that, we can never honestly come up with solutions. I've used this analogy, a metaphor, a couple times that the American public is like the Sopranos kids, right? So Tony Soprano can go and off all these people, right? Because they didn't pay money or whatever reasons, right? And the kids could look at that and say, you know what? I don't care. That's my pops and he's badass. And, I want to do that too. Or the kids can be like, you know what? That's an era in our family history. I'm going to go to college. I'm going to do this with my life. I don't want to be taking over the gang, right? We are in a situation like that. We have forefathers who were racist, who were pretty shitty, genocidal, all sorts of crazy stuff. Okay, that's part of our history. Yeah, my pops is Tony Soprano. You're right. Okay, now what? Now what? Right? So now we are looking at a situation where we have half the not half, totally half, but there's a chunk of the population like, no matter what, you better not talk shit on my gangster dad. And we're just, no matter what, I don't care whatever, it's my family and I don't care. I don't care if you want to point it out, even if it's the truth, you need to shut the hell up. Right? Or we could be like, yeah, you know what? Those are some dark spots in my family history, but look, I ain't seen shit, by the way, but if he was still alive or something, I guess, and you could get in trouble or he could get in trouble, whatever. But at the same time, you gotta respect the truth so that now you can set your life on a better course, right? But we haven't sat down and done that as a country. People get triggered left and right? Everyone turns into a snowflake. That's the conservative word, right? But you should see what happens when you confront a conservative with reality. Because to be honest with you, and I know this intimately because I was raised with some of the conservative views that I hear, the tropes that I hear. And the thing is, a lot of times those guys have to all the time. There's no sometimes, it's all the time. They have to end up either lying or they have to purposely stop themselves from reaching a logical conclusion. I'll give you an example of that. So I was arguing with some libertarians a while back about how chattel slavery, was, well, let me back up. They were saying, when I talk about socialism, when I talk about critiques of capitalism, I'm specifically talking about labor and capital relations. I'm not talking about a market. I believe fully in a market. I believe no matter what, there will always be a market. Even if the government tried to control all manufacturing of all stuff, there will always be a black market in that, the illegal side of a market. So I believe wholeheartedly in a market and not central control. So how, James, how can you be a socialist? I thought that socialism means the government does it all. I thought that means the government controls it all. Well, that's because the McCarthy era and Reagan and people who didn't read any books, or people that did read the books and are paid to obscure the truth, are telling you a bunch of lies. How do I know? Because I went and read the freaking books for my freaking self, right? And when I read the books, you know what really crushed my whole, because I was working in finance, I was seeing the contradictions. It didn't make sense. You know what? And what I thought, what did I think? And this is what conservatives probably think. I thought that, you know what, someone much smarter than me has figured out the logical conclusion. I just didn't figure it out myself, right? And it turns out, no, that is the logical conclusion, that there are contradictions of capitalism will run society into the ground. Why is it that that kind of critique can be levied so easily or readily? Because it's been witnessed. We've seen that happen in our own country here under capitalism, right? In the Gilded Age, when monopoly capitalists owned everything, and when people were dying in the meat packing plants and in the coal mines, and kids were working and all that stuff, that wasn't socialism. That was good old unbridled capitalism. What stopped that? The socialists and the communists, when they demanded labor rights and created strong unions, right? But we forget all that. It's obscured, right? When I read Adam Smith, I realized all that they've been telling me in finance, the smartest people, the people I trusted, were telling me bullshit. Either they never read it or they're lying to my face. I don't know. I want to say they never read it, which makes me feel like, well, then they're not quite as intelligent as I thought, or not as learned as I thought. And if they were intelligent, they would want to read a critique of their own position, right? But people are so, either they are so insecure, or their egos are so tethered to their ideology that they can't dare look to see what it is. You know, they can't look to actually understand what they're talking about. So anyway, I'm talking about what was it? There's libertarians on there, and this happens. They get in a trap. I'll tell you what it is. So my solution to the capital labor relations is basically co-ops. We should be creating cooperative structures, not hierarchical corporate structures, right? And someone would always say, well, go ahead and create the co-op yourself. Why aren't there a whole bunch of co-ops right now? And my answer to them is, well, how many free plantations were there during slavery? Well, if you have people in bondage in these different slave holding plantations, how many free men hold plantations where they're paying the people to work the fields and to do whatever? How many of those existed during that time? So during the time of chattel slavery, how many free enterprises were there? And why weren't there more? Well, the paradigm was that it was more economically feasible, at least the thought was at the time, to continue chattel slavery. Now, not to say that it didn't exist. Of course, there were some that did exist, but the interesting thing that they bring up, which traps them, is they will admit the truth that a wage slave is ultimately cheaper than a chattel slave, right? When you own something, guess what? Who's responsible for upkeep, right? Or in this case, someone, right? But let's say, I mean, that's just crazy that you would even speak in that way, but let's think about that. You own a house. You're the landlord of the house. Something breaks. Who's responsible, right? The owner is responsible, right? What if you're renting the house? Who's responsible, right? The owner is responsible. So what happens is, let's say you purchase your slave, you need to get your return on investment, right? If we're going to speak in total psychopathic terms, right? You need a return on investment. You have to pay for shelter, for food, for medical, for whatever, to keep them alive in order to reap the benefit of having this person, right? Whereas with renting a wage slave, remember, why are they a slave? Why is a wage slave a slave? It's because there's no alternative unless you're born with resources, right? Or you have a situation that you have enough additional capital to save up enough to create your own enterprise. Well, guess what? Everyone else is doing the same thing too. So remember efficient markets theory too. As soon as someone says, oh, for only $10, I can start my own business. Well, guess what? Everyone, as soon as they get $10, is going to start their own business. So how much money are you going to make if everyone else has the same business, right? So we have to look at the completeness of the economic reality and the reality of time, the material reality in which we live, right? And a lot of times the view of the capitalist sycophant, see, a real capitalist knows all this and they exploit it, and that's how they make money, right? But the capitalist sycophant is basically the worker, the laborer, who worships the capitalist, but not the laborer. They don't look to their brothers and sisters as people that they should either emulate or have pride for, etc. They look at the capitalist as the ultimate, right? So how do you escape exploitation? By creating a system to exploit others, right? If you're tired of being exploited to do lawn work, what's your end goal? To create your own lawn care job or lawn care enterprise, so that therefore you can now exploit your brothers and sisters and make some cash off of them and make profit off of them, right? That's the American dream at this point, is I want to escape exploitation by creating another means of exploitation where I get to be the exploiter this time, right? And we all think, oh, I'm just a temporarily broke or temporarily exploited exploiter, but soon I will be the exploiter, and then things will be different, and I got my Bugatti and everything's going to be fine, right? And that so far has been the American dream. And Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, a lot of people, Dr. Richard Wolff, Karl Marx, hell, Adam Smith, the father of capitalism, even warned us about some of the issues that we'll run into if we don't pay attention, like automation, like the breakdown of tasks so that your workers don't have universal skills, but instead have skills specific to your enterprise so that they can't transfer to somewhere else, right? So it's like if you're making chairs, right? Maybe all you do all day is make chair legs, right? But this other person makes the seat, and another person makes something else, and another person assembles it all. So the guy that assembles it doesn't know how to make anything, and the guy that makes something doesn't know how to make the other stuff, and he doesn't know how to assemble it. So now he can't go and make his own, right? Adam Smith outlines this issue. Now, also, what skill does the leg maker necessarily have? Sure, they can whittle wood into a cylindrical form. That's great. If it's transferable into another job, then now they have a transferable skill. But if there's only one chair maker in all of the whole town, and you don't have the resources to create your own chair making enterprise, now you have this basically useless skill other than that one place that you're being exploited. So what's the capitalist to do? Well, exploit you further, right? They know you have nowhere else to go. Do you think you'll get a raise? Right? They know you have nowhere else to go. Do you think that they will coerce you into doing something? Right? So some things to think about. All right. So we've got some live chat entries here. Monique's saying black market is too lucrative to not be in existence. Right. I mean, no matter what, I believe there will always be a market for whatever. So, I remember, I think it was 2012 or something. Ron Paul was running for the Republican nomination, and they were sort of making fun of him in the Republican debate, saying, "Oh, we heard," the moderator was like, "Oh, we heard that you wanted to make all drugs legal." He's like, "Yeah, I do." It's like, even the hard drugs? Like, yeah, even heroin? Yes. And they all laughed. Everyone laughed, right? And he says, and I thought this was brilliant. He said, by show of hands, put your hands up if heroin was legal right now, made it legal right now, how many of you guys would go out and go grab it? All heroin, the designer heroin, the black tar heroin, all the heroin, whatever. I don't even know about heroin. That stuff is all legal. How many people are going to go out and get it? Raise your hand. Of course, nobody raised their hand, right? So he says, well, what good is the law doing if no one's going to go do it anyway because they know better? If the people, in fact, the prohibition of the item might entice people to see why it's prohibited. If anything, just teach them what will happen when you're on heroin, right? Educate people. Then maybe they won't want to do it anymore, right? And better yet, there was an experiment actually done. I don't know the whole details about it, but the gist of the experiment was up until recently, research on addiction was done. Like if they were going to research cocaine addiction in rats, they might, if they were doing this, seeing the addiction of cocaine in rats, what they would do is they would present the rat, just this rat in a cage, right? Like sort of like the Smashing Pumpkins song, right? Despite all their rage, they're in this cage with 2 water bottles, one with cocaine and one with regular water. And what they observed was they would keep hitting that cocaine, bam, 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 all day, right? And then they started doing a different experiment where they created a whole like rat-topia, right? It's got all the toys. I mean, other than freedom, they had all this other stuff, right? So friends, they had stuff to mess with, play with, whatever, lots of food, whatever rats like to do. They had little hidey holes. They had whatever, makes rats feel good. They found that the rats in that environment did not hit the Coke water. Why? Well, they didn't seek the stimulation, the whatever, like when they're in a cage with nothing. I mean, a rat, we know, even though a rat's a rodent, right? Rats are pretty smart. We've at least have done experiments to show that rats are pretty smart. They have a social system, right? They socially interact with each other. And when you take all of that away, when you take away joy, basically, joy for rats. If you take it away, right, and you take away the social stimulus, they will seek stimulus, right? They'll seek alternate stimulus. And if you give them what they need and for them to feel nurtured and wanted or whatever they need to fulfill their ratdom, right, or their, whatever, to be a whole rat, they won't hit the Coke. So it really shed a light on this notion that we have a drug epidemic, possibly less because of the stimulant of the drug and more because of the environment that people are trying to escape or stimulate themselves from, right? And anyway, I don't even remember why I started going in the paradigm, about the black market, right? So of course we prohibit drugs. We had a prohibition on alcohol for a while, prohibition on marijuana right now, which is ridiculous, right? For what? People will find the black market anyway. They will seek it, right? And so, if you want to prevent them from seeking it, see the root cause of their seek, of their search. But we don't want to think that far. That's too that's too deep to try to think about society and that we could change it and all this stuff. Oh no, we can't talk about that kind of stuff. We can talk about the weather or maybe some sports shit or something, but definitely not something as paramount as or pivotal, like whatever you want to think about, foundational as our society's economic culture. It's really a culture thing, right? Abolishing slavery was really a cultural thing. Now it has economic backing to it. I mean, there are economic implications to it, but really it's a cultural shift to say, no, you're not allowed to do this anymore, right? So again, we need another cultural shift to say, no, you're not allowed to rent people either. What's the difference? Well, what's the solution? The solution is, as you give time, that, remember the old adage, time equals money, or money equals time, right? Whatever, either way, time is money, right? So as you give time, you should get equity, right? And some people say, well, you're paid an agreed upon wage. If you want equity, you can buy into the company. Well, first of all, not all companies have shares you can buy, so shut up. Number two, you are working with a deflated wage. You have no choice, or other people have no choice but to stay in the labor market, right? And you could say, well, you could start a business. Well, what business? Without capital, without skills, without all sorts of stuff. What if I'm working so many jobs to just keep myself fed and that I can barely raise my kids? What skill am I going to get, right? Am I supposed to just wait till they're done growing and then go find the skill, right? You know what I mean? It's like we have to confront material reality, which includes the time component, right? Karl Marx talks about the time component. I believe Adam Smith, it's a little tricky. I'm thinking, actually, if you guys are interested, I do have a Patreon account. As you saw, I'm thinking for my Patreon subscribers, of which I have one, Superfan Chris. Thank you very much for being a Patreon subscriber. I've been toying with ideas. How do I entice people to contribute to the show through Patreon? And I'm thinking maybe to do a sort of a reading study of Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations and Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels together, Capital, the basic, it's called Capital, Das Kapital, right? And it is the 4-volume, right? It's 4 volumes, big volumes, critique of capitalism. And why is it 4 volumes? Why is Adam Smith book so freaking huge, right? Because it's complex. So anytime you hear someone talk, oh, it's simple, blah, 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 and they blast out some stupid shit, it's stupid shit. It is simply put stupid shit because it's not a real critique. And in fact, the people that just dump out their quick quip about socialism or capitalism typically have little clue about the realities of either system, you see. All right, so let's see what else we got on the live chat. Oh, you guys are blowing it up. I've been ignoring you. I'm so sorry. Here I am ranting away as per the usual. Where are we? Oh, Monique says, besides, there will always be those that want what they should not have and those willing to provide whatever at a cost. Yes, but again, I think that there's a root cause. It could be a trauma, could be trauma via conditioning. Hell, even my conditioning is conditioned, if you remember Brown Skin Lady from the Black Star album. If you have not checked out the Black Star album, which is actually dang near 20 years old, I think now. It's the collaboration between Mos Def and Talib Kweli, one of the top hip hop albums, I believe, ever made. Respiration, amazing song. And Brown Skin Lady's an amazing song too. All right, so Superfan Chris says, so we discussed this a few days ago about the paradigm shift that is needed. Where does it start? At school, at home, we are taught that Marxism or socialism is bad. This is intentional, no? Monique said, not me. And then Kate says, socialism is made to seem scary. Superfan Chris says, Kate Crowley, exactly. Yes, I mean that it's based on propaganda. Literally, back in the, even as far back as, God, even the who are the Weeblies or Wobblies, the worker, it's basically Workers International. I mean, this was back ever since Karl Marx put the critique out in the 1870s. I think it was maybe it was 1860s, where he put where him and Frederick Engels published Capital. From pretty much from that point on, you had people who were saying, "Yeah, this system is screwed up. Look at it. Look around us. The squalor, all of the things that are happening. There's got to be a better way." And it really came to a head after World War II, and then got worse and worse, right? And we started seeing, as the Cold War started ramping up, and also as you saw the Korean War, Cuban Missile Crisis, things like that, you saw the Soviet Union as a big threat. So you not only do we need propaganda to just say, hey, so the Soviet Union is bad because they are trying to take on, or they're trying to expand. Really, I mean, I don't even know if you could really say they were trying to expand as much as the Western imperial forces wanted to basically take over the world, including China and Russia, if they could. And though I am not going to defend the authoritarian and, basically what amounts to state capitalism, right? That sounds like an oxymoron to people who don't know about it, but basically who owns the means of production? If it's the state and you have like a vanguard party, and you don't have vanguard party, meaning the party elites, the party apparatchiks, right? This is the big fear of the Ben Shapiro's and the right wing who fails to even look at a critique. They will not. They are afraid. They are scared. They are the scared that I remember there was I worked with a zookeeper once back in the day, and he was telling me a story about how one of the scariest things that they could do at the zoo was feed the polar bears, right? You had to open the door, and there was a double door, almost like a sealing chamber. It's like a equal, it's like when someone goes out in space or something, and you watch a movie or even in real life, there's like you go through one door, and then there's a separate door that goes outside, and then you go inside the chamber, and then they let all the air out, and then they open the door, and you're ready to go outside. So they had something similar. That way you couldn't just open the door and then there would be a polar bear standing there. And he said that the fear that you would get is you would think that someone might have forgot to close that door. And so when you're walking around in that area, you almost always think in the back of over your shoulder, or on the back side of your eye, that polar bear is there. I mean, the polar bear's paws are bigger than your whole face, like gigantic, 12-inch long, swat you in the face, knock your head off, literally take your head off, SWAT, this kind of thing. And it's real scary. And so sometimes it's almost like he described it like you almost don't want to look, because if he was there, it would be beyond scary. So it's like, or some of you guys might have been in a situation when something bad, or like, oh no, I might get tackled if they're playing football, or something's happening. You're not going to look back because I don't want to see. And that's where they are. They don't want to see it because they know they might not have a rebuttal. So they stick to the tropes. They stick to like this ideology. It's a religious ideology because they refuse to look at reality because the capitalists are paying them not to. Bottom line, they're either just ideological and purposefully ignorant, or they're paid to say what they're saying. I mean, because those are really the only options, because if they had actually read the critique and understood the critique, they would see what is happening, right? But they create a straw man, they create all this stuff. Anyway, so Superfan Chris says, a few days ago we talked about it. How do we change this? You're taught Marxism and socialism bad. Yes, because it's intentional, because because it takes away the right of Jeff Bezos, for instance, to pay the minimal he can to his workers, given whatever desperation. Remember, capitalist pay is inversely proportionate to desperation. So he needs a whole warehouse full of people. Well, how many people are going to agree to that wage? And that's what he's going to give them. The bare minimum he can do that will get the sort of level of quality rep or person in there that he can rent for a period of time and exploit to make money, right? These people could work for him for 10 years and have nothing on the tail end of it, right? Now, Jeff Bezos and the capitalists would say, well, I paid them the agreed upon wage. They didn't have to do it. They could have found another place. Sure, they could have found another place to get exploited, and that person knows that it's either they get exploited here or they get exploited there. They can't go live off the land. There is no alternative. Nobody's handing them, the means of production. Hey, if you don't want to go work at Walmart, here's your own little store, right, to work in. Or, hey, you can go work at Walmart because you're great at working at helping to make the enterprise run. You can work at Walmart. And what if you were, after 10 years or after some period of time, you had ownership of it, a little slice, right? You had shares of it. That would make all the difference. All the difference. You are working a wage that is deflated. Remember, if there was a land grant, if there was land grants like there were to white people, and when was that? Whenever the land grant colleges were, etc. Right? Was it 30s or maybe even before that? They were granting land out. You just put your name in and they give you a bunch of acreage and then you go work the land and that's your land, right? And they even sent you to college to learn how to work that. And we won't even get to the generational wealth implications of this type of policy, right? But why couldn't we institute that? What if we had the commons? What if we had land grants that say, if you don't want to work at Walmart, you don't want to work this menial job that gives you zero fulfillment, you would rather go eke your living with 40 acres and a mule out on the land. If that was an option, hey, you know what? Oddly enough, the irony is a lot of conservatives would get the hell out from whatever they're doing to eke the living in the matrix, and they would go fight and scratch their way in the wilderness or in some chunk of land, right? This would be right up their alley. But they're so ideologically fixed on this notion that freedom, capitalism, and the American way are all linked somehow together. And that's propaganda. That is purposeful propaganda by the same people who wanted to make sure that Malcolm X, that Dr. Martin Luther King, and anyone else who was vocal about capitalism was silenced or smeared. Or I mean, hell, they sent Dr. King a letter telling him basically that he should commit suicide, and why, outlining. I mean, it's documented. It was a Freedom of Information Act. You can see what they sent, right? So this is purposeful. Why? Why would they do that? Well, because his message was too disruptive, because there's too much money to be made through exploiting other people. And they know it, and they don't want to stop it. They want to keep the Jeff Bezoses, want to keep it flowing. And anyone else that's not quite Jeff Bezos level wants to be, right? And even if they're not, they still want, they recognize game. And they know in their mind that, well, they think in their mind that they are the elite and they deserve it, and that they should be the ones running the society, because these other idiots out here, they're meant to be used as tools and commodity. All right, so Superfan Chris says, until some sound information was given to me just last week, I felt that way about it. Monique says, scary because it goes against the hierarchy they have in place. Amen. Yes, because what I described, imagine this, if you were part owner in any enterprise, let's say it was a car wash, it could be anything, it could be Walmart. If you're part owner, how many bosses do you need to tell them to do your job? What is the purpose of a boss? The purpose of a boss is to maximize the performance of an uninterested person who is simply the opposite reaction, the equal and opposite reaction to a stimulus, right? Remember, what wage will the capitalist pay? The capitalist will pay inversely proportionate to your desperation. Do you have a special skill? Do you have some kind of special something about you? Well, then you're not desperate. If you're not desperate, the capitalist will pay you more. But if you're desperate, you'll take what you can get, and they know it. So they'll give you whatever you'll take, right? So what's the flip side? If they're paying you as little as possible, what are you going to do as a laborer? Probably as little as possible. Now, there are some people that have intrinsic pride and and that's the thing too, that the capitalists will of course exploit that. They will call you family. We're like family. You should just work for free for me. It's okay. Do I really need to pay you? Come on, we're like family. Wait a minute. So unless we're like family and you're going to give me some special Christmas presents like family, or you're going to do some stuff like family, then don't call me family, right? If you're going to need me to work for free, right? So you can see there will be an equal and opposite reaction. But what if the worker was interested? What if the worker had ownership? Like, hey, the harder I work, the more my quarterly bonus is going to be because I'm a shareholder in this. I don't need a boss to tell me how to do it better and faster. Well, maybe better. Maybe you have someone mentoring you to do better. There's always process improvement, blah, blah, blah. But it's not about performance metrics per se to motivate the staff, right? Because you should be self-motivated since you have the potential to, or you have the pathway to ownership and reaping the rewards of the profit that your labor created. I say to the capitalist, when the capitalist sycophant, especially, the capitalists, I barely run into them because there's not very many actual capitalists that own the means of production, right? And have employees working that means, laborers working the means of production. Most people are laborers who basically are lapdogs to the money, right? And they're all too willing to sacrifice of themselves as martyrs to fulfill the wishes of capital, right? And we see them all over the place. They will sacrifice time with their family that they can't get back. First birthday, Oh, well, I'm a hard worker for my family. Well, guess what? Maybe your kid would want to be with you on a pivotal day instead of knowing that you just spent a bunch of time chasing some dollars to be exploited by the capitalist and make them a lot of money, right? We have this weird, it's also more propaganda, this weird reverence for the laborer and contempt for the laborer. Right? Oh, I'm a hard hat wearing blue collar man. Screw those guys. But don't really screw those guys because I want to be one of them and they earned it. And I could always do better. And I could always, my granddad, he worked on the factory floor and he loved it and he didn't complain and he was American. Well, and it was right for him to work hard and be exploited. That's just what you do in America. It's like you have a love-hate psychosis. You'll hear this all the time, especially in conservative circles. Their thought process, because it is a propagandistic, it's based on propaganda and ideology, there's a lot of contradictions that they will not face. They will refuse to face it because as soon as they face it, that polar bear, bam, in their identity, because they now identify with the ideology. When you start talking about it, you might as well be talking about them. You might as well be talking directly about how they look and how they talk and anything about them, because they have now tethered their identity to this ideology. And if you try, there's no way to say, for them to say, you know what, that makes sense. Maybe I was wrong this whole time. Hell, I was there until there were a few times when I'd run into a logical conclusion that didn't make sense. Like, for instance, hey, wages are set on supply and demand. So if automation happens, so we don't need as many workers, population still continues to grow, There's a huge supply of laborers, right? And we could also still outsource them and all of that. So eventually wages will drop so low that, and inflation will continue going up to where you can't afford to live anymore. Right. So I thought to myself, man, that's sort of true. There's got to be a smarter person out there like Milton Friedman, Thomas Sowell, Hayek, Mises or whatever. I mean, all of these writers who write about how capitalist sycophants, you may notice, here's the irony, you may notice that these people never really created enterprises other than the enterprise of promulgating their message. Like Milton Friedman wrote books to basically push his message. That was his business, right? So he didn't create enterprises and then talk to us about it necessarily. Maybe he did a little bit here and there, but he decides to basically take the straw man of, well, markets mean the most and the markets are paramount. Well, yeah, markets are great. We can still keep markets while allowing equity to, or allowing workers to gain equity in the enterprises that they help build. And the bigger the enterprise, the more democratic control the laborers should have. Why? Because let's say you have 20,000 employees. The original owners of that built that company, if you're up to 20,000 employees, how much work is the original owner, the founder, really putting in as far in when you look at the entirety of the enterprise? Right? You could say if they were a sole proprietor with no laborers, then sure. Yes, by all means, if Jeff Bezos did it all by himself and he didn't have to hire anybody, didn't have to partner with anybody, and did it all by himself, keep that money, brother. Keep it. You did it all by yourself. But as soon as you start looping in people, you should treat them like partners. Why? I say this over and over again. Why? If I can give you $100 and get shares from your company and have ownership, immediately have equity and reap the benefits of equity immediately. But I can work for you 100 years and have nothing at the end on a wage that's based on coercion that I have no choice but to take. Because, oh yeah, maybe not your enterprise, but I have another enterprise. Thank God we have a minimum wage. At least there's a floor, right? And there are people now, even now, talking about there should be a zero minimum wage because they don't look at material reality. They don't look at the whole picture and walk down to the logical conclusion. What is their real logical conclusion? Can you live off a zero wage? That makes no sense, right? But they will say on Fox News, in the open, publicly, they will talk about, yeah, we should have a zero minimum wage. If people want to work for it, they should have the freedom to do so. Well, how the hell are you going to make a live? How are you going to live? What is their logical conclusion? You won't live. Eventually, enough people will die off. They'll be culled from the population, those useless people. If they don't have money, they're useless, right? If they don't have money, they can't be intelligent, right? If they don't have money, they must not be worth anything. So if they die, guess what? Wages will go up because supply will diminish, and then we'll need more people. That is their logical conclusion. They don't say that out loud to you because it's psychopathic, but that is their logical conclusion because there is no that is the logical conclusion. Remember, a wage slave is actually cheaper than a chattel slave. So thank God we have that system, because a chattel slave, at least we want to keep you alive so that you could be used in the enterprise. If you die as a wage slave, guess what? There's another sore sap right behind you, ready to take your spot because they're desperate enough. And as soon as they die, there's another one, and another one, and another one, right? And that is the system that we have now. I'm not saying let's go to chattel slavery. I'm saying that the slavery of wages is only a little less galling than chattel slavery. Frederick Douglass, that the slavery of wages only a little less galling than chattel slavery, and it must go down with the other. That's what, I mean, it's coming from a former slave, okay? Frederick Douglass. If you're not familiar, I would definitely take a look. All right, so Monique says it goes against the hierarchy they have in place, which of course has them on top. Yes, of course. And it doesn't bother them to be stepping on others' necks to be there. Absolutely not. Superfan Chris says, yes, very good point, Monique. Monique says, lofty position. It's crazy to have so much more than their fellow man. Something is wrong with someone who knows there are people hungry and they have billions of dollars. Mind blowing. Right. And why? Why do they hold on to that? Because some of them have this ideological penchant that if I were to help my fellow man, then they will be none other than pigeons coming to me begging for crumbs all the time, and I can't get rid of them. So I might as well just not deal with them, and let's let them cull out of the population. They're useless anyway. You know, it's interesting. Along those lines, there are people who aren't like that, who like the late Stephen Jay Gould. He, a brilliant guy. I need to read more books by him. He had a great book called The Panda's Thumb. It's a huge, or not huge. It's actually a really easy to read, so small book, but it has huge impact. It talks about evolutionary biology and the mistakes sort of made along the way. So some of you guys, if you're religious out there, might ruffle some feathers, but basically the critique was, if a grand creator created everything and the grand creator is perfect, then why would the grand creator use all the same parts? We have all the same bones that other animals, even whales have the same bones in their flippers that we do. They have vestigial legs. Like if you tear down a whale all the way down to the skeleton, they have little pelvis. Why would they need that? They don't have legs back there. Oh, they used to, right? If you look at a boa constrictor, one of the most primitive of snakes, they have spurs in their back, the back of their bodies, because those were once legs there. Snakes came from lizard-like animals. In fact, there's something called a glass snake, which is actually a lizard with no legs. It evolved to give up something, right? The panda's thumb is an extra digit that's grown out of a bone in their hand to create this extra digit for them to eat their bamboo, right? Because they just eat this bamboo, right? And they need that extra leverage. The panda's thumb wasn't just another thumb on the other side. A perfect creator create a perfect thumb on the other side? Why would the perfect creator take the same piece I have and just extend it out, right? Just interesting. Stephen Jay Gould also said during this time where people were, man, it's getting warm here. I need to turn that AC back. When people were talking about Einstein's brain and how many creases and folds it has in there. And he says, look, from a scientist's perspective, he says, I'm less concerned by the convolution and contortions or whatever he said of Einstein's brain than I am that there's another Einstein stuck somewhere on a farm that will never see the world, that will never be known to the world. That is the system by which we live. That if you have no money, if you have no resources, then you are automatically worthless. How many Einsteins are automatically worthless in our society? And it doesn't have to be Einstein level thought. What if you are just someone who's able to communicate to people who have mental illnesses? Guess what? The people with mental illnesses, do they have a lot of money? Probably not. Right? And so how much money do you stand to make off your special skill? So you might as well, in this current paradigm, you might as well die because you're useless because you can't make money. That is the system by which we live. Now, if you were to get equity, let's say you work at a place for 10 years, now you have equity, you have ownership, you have shares. I have 10 years worth of shares I've accumulated. Either I could sell them off, and now I have a capital infusion. Now with this big chunk of money, I have resources. Now what I want to do? Maybe I want to start a business. Maybe I just want to volunteer and help people. Maybe I want to use my special skill to help people with mental issues cope with something and not get paid. That's okay. I got my needs taken care of. I can do my work. Maybe you're religious, want to do God's work. Hey, guess what? Now you can do it. You've worked 10 years at this place. You have a way to do that. You have a vector to do that. Maybe you don't want to sell your shares and get that major capital influx. Maybe you just want the continued dividends from the enterprise that you helped build, right? With those continued dividends, with that continued residual income, maybe now you could do your volunteer work. Maybe now you could start your own business. Maybe now you could fulfill the dreams that you have in your life, right? Because you earned it. You earned it. But the system we have now doesn't provide that pathway. And that fundamentally is the issue. Imagine how much more community you would have if you didn't have to spend your days toiling. If you could spend some time away from work and you had a residual income or you had a base chunk of capital, how much more time could you spend with your family, with society, getting involved in government? You name it. And get this, some people just like doing stuff. They don't need to necessarily get paid. They have an intrinsic want. There might be some guy out there that just likes making toys. He wants to make people happy. He just makes toys and he gives them away to kids. Well, guess what? Now the toy manufacturers are going to have to contend with the dude that likes to make toys and he's just giving them out. Guess what? He has a ton of time now. He's already worked for an enterprise. He now gets to have some of that, just like a shareholder would. We are now creating the vectors by which all of us can share. It's not through taxation. I don't trust no damn government. Another straw man, another conservative straw man that people on the left, what does left even mean? Right? If we go back to the original meaning of left, that means the people who didn't want to keep the French aristocracy back in the French Revolution, when feudalism was falling apart. It was either we stayed with the king and upheld feudalism and the rights of the lords and the serf system, or we get rid of that and we move towards a capitalistic society where the owners of the means of production, either land or other means of production, they reap the benefits off of rented commodity labor. Now, and this is part what Karl Marx sort of predicted, at some point capitalism will be able to create such an abundance that our needs will be able to be fulfilled through relatively little effort. And I think we can say that we have now created the means of production to overwhelm ourselves in production. That now of all times may be the actual time where we transition from a competitive, a fake, by the way, a concocted competitive scenario and move towards a cooperative scenario where we work together. And we don't, look, again, if the capitalist has to contend with your volunteer work, if the capitalist has to contend with people making stuff for free, now their prices will have to drop. People will have a different relationship with their work. People will have a different relationship with things, with money. The society will start to evolve. People will intrinsically, through motivations, internal motivations, do things, right? And you hear people from the quote unquote right wing, right? So again, going back to the French Revolution, right wing, the right side were people that wanted to stay with the aristocracy or with the feudal system. The ones on the left side, the left wing or the leftists, were progressives in that they wanted to ditch that system and move forward. So in that sense, in the truest sense of the word, what I'm speaking of is extremely left. But we've been conditioned to believe that left means I have blue hair and only care about identity politics and eighth wave feminism and whatever that is. You know, all of these tropes about what is left wing, right? Like that, like as if Nancy Pelosi was a queen of the left wing. She's not talking about capital and labor relations. Hell no. Those Raytheon and those guys pay her. Jeff Bezos pays her. She's a bought politician. So, I mean, just because she's Democrat don't mean shit. I'm not a party. If you haven't noticed, I'm not a party affiliated person. Parties can kiss my ass. They are the reason why our country is going to shit. Why my brothers and sisters in this country are suffering. Right? All right. So I've been yapping a lot. So here we go. Hey, we've got a lot going on in the live chat. So I've been just dumping all this stuff. All right, so here we go. Laborers are the foundation. Amen. Right? That is something that, you know, W.E.B. Du Bois. There's also, I think he mentioned some things along those lines, but there's someone else that's even deeper, specifically in economics. I can't remember. He gave a whole speech while he was in court for promulgating. He was arrested and on trial for promulgating socialistic ideas. And he had some great speeches. Dang it, I'm gonna have to come back to that one. Anyway, laborers are the foundation, but because there is no unity in the approach, those in control simply trade out those who ask for equal compensation for what they provide. Amen. Yes, it's a game on the people, right? Superfan Chris says, I feel like the crack in the dam, the system, is slowly opening. People are beginning to wake up, but the distraction with party affiliation is keeping folks stagnant. Yes, absolutely. It's on purpose. The curators of perception are driving that towards you. When Fox News talks about the lamestream media, they're creating this Hegelian dialectic, right? The thesis that, you know, that the mainstream is what's it called? Is lying to you. What's the antithesis? Well, that we are telling you the truth, right? As if that's true. And so this is a dialectic, right? Or meaning there's two opposite, you know, points. So Hegel, an old philosopher from way back, pointed this out. There's a way to manipulate society, create the dialectic, have a thesis, then the antithesis, right? So what's the thesis? The thesis, for instance, to generate a thesis of socialism is bad, therefore capitalism is good. So let's create the dialectic, right? And then support one side heavily with money and airtime and everything from the school system all the way to anywhere. Always is in favor of the money, right? And that's just it's a pervasive narrative, and it's born of a lot of different things, but definitely neoliberal policy, etc. Kate says party affiliation is the best thing to happen to the government. LOL. It really does keep everyone busy arguing about really nothing. Yeah. Not only are your noses to the grindstone as your wages stay stagnant in the face of higher rent, higher ownership costs, higher inflation on all products, and blah blah blah, right? As that happens, you aren't paying attention to what they're doing. You're not getting into you're not running for a city council, or you're not doing these things to get involved. Right? It's on purpose. All right, so I'm going to run through this, and I think we've been going on for a little over an hour, but I want to finish these comments, because you guys are amazing comments. I'm sorry I've been yapping all this time. All right, so what else we got? Monique says, my concern is that because I'm more aware, it feels like people are waking up. This is not new. I am what is new, no doubt. The question is where do I lend my energy to move the needle in the right direction? That's a great point, and that's why I started the show, is so we could fellowship about these issues and talk about it openly and honestly. That's why, look, could be libertarians and capitalist sycophants. There's one person on Facebook, I have no clue. I saw some people going in and out on Facebook that I know for sure, super right-wing people, and they didn't say anything, but I mean, that what I said is polar opposite of what they've been taught. And if they want to battle, hey, I even troll on purpose. I troll libertarian right-wing people all the time, challenging them for a debate. I have no takers, maybe because I'm too small fry, but I already know. I purposely put my words and my ideas out there to see what the counter argument is. Give me the critique. As Tim Minchin says, great comedian guy in Australia, Tim Minchin gave a speech in front of University of Australia, I believe, or University of Sydney. I don't remember. One of these universities down there. And he said, opinions are, in fact, like arseholes, right? Except one huge difference between opinions and assholes. Unlike assholes, your opinion should be constantly and thoroughly examined, right? So I put my opinion out there, not only for my own constant and thorough examination, but that way someone else could look at it from an opposite point of view. I don't choose socialist websites to dump my opinions on. No, I go and find the most super right-wing, Ayn Rand loving, whatever, Milton Friedman, Hayek worshiping places, and I dump straight up socialist bullet points. And I'm like, try me, bitch. And I take them out. Every time they get stuck into their logical conclusions, they can't get away. They can only give me straw men about the market and the government. I'm like, motherfucker, I didn't say nothing about the government or the market. The government would only have to control a business to the extent that they control them now. It was the abolition of slavery tantamount to government control. The abolition of wage slavery will be the same thing. It's not tantamount to government control. We don't need to have central control. We don't need to have the government like as if it's some animal off into the country. It's not, it is supposed to be us, by the way, right? But it's not government control. It could be worker control. You could have a coffee shop and you have 10 employees. Well, guess what? The 10 employees have a vector towards equity and they have the democratic control of the workplace. Boeing recently had a bunch of crashes with the 737 Max. CEO gets like a $60-something million golden parachute for fucking up, and almost 7,000 people get laid off. Guess what? If you had democratic control of the workplace, do you think they would hire that asshole? Maybe not. And guess what? If they did have to fire him, do you think they would give him a golden parachute? Hell no. Not if it meant laying off 7,000 of their brothers for that one person's mistake. That's why we need democratic control. That asshole or the shareholders or the venture capitalists or whoever decided to continue doing that paid zero cost. The workers lost their livelihoods through no fault of their own. And they will turn and look you in the eye and say that that's freedom. All right. What is it? So what do we say? Do not, for me, I think it is in focusing on our children so they do not have to come from as far back, and because they will not, then they will naturally get further. They must be taught in their self-worth. Absolutely. I go back to why, we could talk about culture. We could talk about the radio. We could talk about media. We could talk about all of those things. But all of those things are all built, crafted on the foundation of capitalism, right? On this notion that we're competing against each other. You can get to the point where, right? Well, here's the thing. In Marx's critique of capitalism, you see this word over and over again, alienation, that you become alienated. You are an alien, an outsider. You are detached. You get alienated from your family because you have to spend your time away and you don't get it back, right? You can make money back. You lose 10,000, you can make 10,000. You lose 10 years, you don't make 10 years back. You can't get that back. So when your kid's already grown up, you don't get that back, right? Anyway, I don't even remember. Oh, so you get alienated from your family. You're alienated from your coworker because now you see them as as competition. You're alienated from your fellow because not only because of the grind, you're staying away from community stuff. You're not involved with community. You don't have time and all of these things. Plus, you have people like the app creators, social media people, all of these people who know how to take your visceral Freudian type reptilian brain wants and needs and capitalize on that. And we are not prepared for the sophistication of their ability to make us addicted to the shit they make money on. It's on purpose. Edward Bernays in the 1930s wrote a book about propaganda. He got women, despite all of the religious stigma, despite all of any other stigma, historic stigma against smoking, he got all of them to smoke like immediately by using their visceral urges to be wanted, to be respected, right? Especially women in a patriarchal society. They had no respect. They had no control. So what did he do? He used that against them. He showed pictures of a woman holding a cigarette and all these men fawning over her. He showed the high class women. Oh, the woman with money, she has this. You want to be like her, right? And they played on the visceral, not because of smoking tastes good, not because it made me feel better. No, it used to be like that, right? Then Edward Bernays, the nephew of Freud, says, whoa, wait, uncle, you got some good points. How can we capitalize on this? He created literally, it's called Propaganda in the 30s. You can read it. It's not even a real big book. His idea is that there should be a ruling elite because these slobs can't figure shit out for themselves. Otherwise, they would be elites. Simple, right? All right. So Kate says, yes, indeed. Monique says, and their power inherent in all of us. Yes, we all have that power, which of course is alienated from us. We're even alienated from our own power in the system. Superfan Chris says, Monique, we definitely need to focus on the youth and show them the way. There is a societal paradigm shift that must occur. That's why I'm open and honest. If the youth wants to come talk, let's talk. Now, chances are, if they go and talk to their parent and they're like a capitalist sycophant, then they might go nuts. But I don't know. Come talk to me. You know, parents, let's talk. Kate says, I like the fellowship idea. Well, if you like the fellowship idea, I have an idea for a fellowship, a physical fellowship, basically a alternative to church, where we don't really talk about God per se, like an ethereal being. We talk about being better people. And the sort of the mantra for this fellowship, I think I'm just going to call it the fellowship or fellowship. The mantra is fellowship, not worship. That we are coming together to talk. Something we miss out on. We're on social media. We seek the belonging. We seek to fellowship with our fellow, right? But we don't face to face. We don't have that thing that we all, most of us, really are seeking. We are pack animals. We are community beings. You cannot kill the lion alone. Now these idiot libertarians and some of these guys are like, I get a gun and I'll go shoot him. You didn't invent the gun, idiot. Now you can with technology. Did you invent that technology? No, you're standing on the shoulders of all the humans that came before you. So shut the fuck up. You're not even thinking it through. You are still not killing the lion alone. You cannot kill the lion alone. And if you can, great. But after he gets through mauling you and whatever, just wait till the lionesses get a piece. And then the hyena, you can't even take out a pack of hyenas. I'm telling you, humans are just weak and ill prepared. We need our brothers and sisters to help us against this cruel, cruel world. All right. Where we got fellowship. Monique says distraction is the name of the game. Focus must be ours. Absolutely. And Superfan Chris says yes, focus. Alex says, Kate, the seed has been planted for the fellowship is coming. We'll keep you all in the loop. Yes, definitely. If you, yeah, I mean, imagine this place where we come together and instead of a sermon, we have discussion. And it could be about current events. It could be about a story that we can learn a lesson from. And guess what? You would have crowd participation. Pass around a mic. What do you think about it? What questions do you have? I'm not the master, or whoever's leading the discussion isn't the master. It's just that we're facilitating an honest and open discussion. That's all, which is what's missing. We're told, don't talk politics, don't talk religion, don't talk anything that's like really deep. Don't talk about the climate. Don't talk about, don't talk about any important shit. Just talk about like sports and weather and some menial, dumb, stupid shit, right? And meanwhile, who's talking about that shit? Who's really thinking about that stuff? These people, right? They have their hand on the Ouija board. Koch brothers, George Soros. I don't give a shit. Whoever you think is the conspiracy theory. Guess what? If you know what a Ouija board is, it's that thing supposedly controlled by the devil, right? And it spells out shit. What's the trope when you're moving it and someone says, whoa, who's moving it? It's not me. Right? There's always plausible deniability. So the petroleum industrial complex, the military industrial complex will always say, it's not me moving it. But meanwhile, it's always moving to screw the American populace, to screw the global population. Right? All right. So yes, please, if you guys are interested in fellowship, we will be holding it in the Duval area. So Superfan Chris says, are you talking about A. Philip Randolph? Monique says, is there not something out there, fellowship? If the wheel has already been invented, why start from a lump of stone? Let us continue ripple effect versus being the drop. Superfan Chris says, we haven't seen or heard of a fellowship that is open to everyone to come and talk and share ideas without any quote unquote leader. Basically, it's like the show, but everyone in the room together. Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of like the structure of church without the ethereal beings and stuff. We're not getting into the religious stuff. And now some people say, oh, the Unitarian church is sort of like that, which might be, maybe that'll, it's similar to what we're trying to do. But if it is, then, we could work with them if that's the case. But I sort of want, I get Monique's point. If that's true, if that's out there, hey, and if you don't mind, if you know of any, let us know and we will build upon that. But, this is a place where people should not, we might be talking about things that are very upsetting because we're going to talk about them very openly and honestly. There are a lot of people that would get upset about this discussion that I've had critiquing the system in the way I have. And they would go nuts because there is no rebuttal, no real rebuttal to it because we see it. We've seen it happen in our country. And we see that what the solutions that are given out aren't true solutions. They're ruses. They're red herrings to distract us from the reality that is our material contemporary reality. All right, so this will conclude tonight's show. An hour and 30 minutes. Look, I didn't know if I had enough to talk about tonight. I was actually a little bit afraid that that letter to the editor wouldn't be enough. But because our fellowship tonight, all of the active comments and your willingness to be open and talk about some of these things. You don't have to agree with me, but I remember there's been a few times that I've been accused of, because I will argue my point and I will expect you to argue your point. If you have a rebuttal against what I say, I'm listening to it. But if I have a rebuttal to your rebuttal, I'm going to levy it. I'm going to give it to you. And if you basically can't destroy my premise, a la, per philosophical argument style, if my premise still holds while you scurry with your argument, well, then you you haven't defeated my premise. Therefore, I have no obligation to change my mind. If you tell me that there is an alternative to exploitation without resources, and that does take into account efficient markets theory and the fact that not everyone can run a business, okay, and you articulate that in a rock solid manner that exists within contemporary reality, I will have to say, damn, good point. Hold on, I don't have a rebuttal. I got to think about it. I never thought about it that way, right? I would step back, but until then, shit, you got work to do. And some people say, well, you only listen to James Boyd, you have to be right. I'm like, no, I just constantly and thoroughly examine my shit, right? My opinions constantly and thoroughly examine. I dip them in the hot oil on purpose to make sure that it can last, right? And by doing so, I feel like that it's become more and more robust because I've seen the critiques, I've seen the rebuttals, and I've been able to field them. Now, someday, I'm not saying that it will never happen, but I'm trying to make it happen so that I can learn some new things, right? And so that I can have new perspective. All right. Superman Chris says, the A. Philip Randolph comment was in regards to the other person you were trying to think of who made speeches about socialism. Oh, did he do that? Wow, I didn't know he did that. Tell me more about what you learned. No, it wasn't A. Philip Randolph. It was another guy that was Debs, Eugene V. Debs. If you look at some of his speeches, man, he's got some great things to say. He basically said that he is the lowliest laborer, and that he hold on, let me just find this, Eugene. I don't know, because he was on trial he was a major labor supporter, and he was on trial for having these ideas, promulgating ideas, and stuff like this. So here's a Eugene Debs quote. I have no country to fight for. My country is the earth, and I am a citizen of the world. While there is a lower class, I am in it. While there is a criminal element, I am of it. And while there is a soul in prison, I am not free. The most historic word in all languages is revolution. When great changes occur in history, when great principles are involved, as a rule, the majority. When great changes occur in history, when great principles are involved, as a rule, the majority are wrong. So, yeah, and they have been. I mean, you look at all the different empires and all the things that have happened. One of the things I think I want to leave you with and to point out is a lot of times, you see stuff like people talk about, oh, well, human nature is to conquer and to conquest and to take over, etc. And, look at the Mongol Empire, look at the Roman Empire, look at the doobie-doo, look at this. And I'm like, well, who motivated that? Was it the populace? Was it the plebiscite? Was it everybody that did it? Or did you have a leader that led the population into that? Because one thing that we can say truly about human nature is that we are group beings, and that we do follow leadership. And that's just part of being in a pack. I mean, that we just naturally follow leadership. And even though a lot of us have leadership capacity of our own, typically we will go along with either a leader that we believe in, or someone who we feel like can guide us, right? We seek that in general, the majority of us. Now, some of us think that they should rule the world, right? But that's a minority. So can we really define humanity by minority, right? So that's something to think about there. All right, so Kate says, I don't know anything at all about A. Philip Randolph outside of him having a street name for him. Maybe I'll check him out. Look at me learning new stuff over here. Every day is a school day. That's right. Every day we should be learning something, right? You learn, constantly learning. And then when you stop learning, that's when you die, right? So, and Superfan Chris said he's reading his book right now for A. Philip Randolph. All right, so I got Sep Rock Beats coming in the background here, and meaning that we are at the end of the show. Remember to like, subscribe, tell your friends. We're trying to build up the audience, because look how fun it is when people are jumping in and we have a good conversation. Hey, bring some people that want to that you think will want to argue. Get some super capitalist people in, and just let's hash it out. Test me out, test my theories out, and see what happens when they're under constant and thorough examination. Remember, do not do that with your butthole, just your opinions, unless you like it constantly and thoroughly. Anyway, whatever. Until next time, I will see y'all later. Peace. Looks like my camera has frozen, so you get to look at me making this weird face while the outro plays. Thank you all for jumping in. Superfan Chris, Superfan Kate, and Superfan Monique, thank you so much for participating. And I'm out.